welcome to Lunar Alchemy. My name is John, and this, as I'm sure you all know, is Bella. Hi, Bella.
Hi.
Hey, welcome. Let me get this started for our members. Okay, here we are. Welcome to Lunar Alchemy. I'm very, very excited to be here with everybody today. We are looking at the shadow of oppression in gene key 47 because the sun has just today moved into that particular gate's transit. And in terms of lunar alchemy, we've really reached the particular transit that is at the very basis of everything that we're doing through this process. And this particular gene key and shadow are at the heart of all internal transformation in terms of this alchemy that we are performing around the lunar body. So that's what we're going to talk about today. I'm super excited about what we're doing in here. And I can't wait to hear Bella's insights onto gene key 47 because it is the programming partner of one of those gene keys that is really at the center of the gene key matrix, gene key 22. So there's so much to discuss today, and yeah, let's get started. Hi, Bella.
Hi.
How are you feeling today?
I'm good. We were teaching about Pluto, we were sharing about Pluto with Ashley, and yeah, it feels like it's a small planet, and so it's so far out, and at the same time it's so important for us on Earth and how it works with the shadow and how integrating the shadow is the only way. Because if we deny that the shadow is there and we just kind of think that there's light and angels and we can't even look at those aspects of ourselves, then what Pluto does is that he comes in and he kind of like everything can just, all the core stability, all the material stability, all the important relationships, everything can kind of be wiped, because as souls we learn through these processes of death and rebirth, and that's the way it is. So I feel like I'm still a bit in that, because it's not something we traditionally look at in the gene keys. It's something that Richard has spoken about long ago, more when he was working with Ra, and we were looking at the outer planets through human design. But in the gene keys, it's very much Richard Rudd has the 5 as his purpose. So it's everything is kind of in his timing, and patience is the gift. And sometimes I don't feel like it's a gift, but I guess what I do is that I explore in the meantime. So I feel kind of the weight of Pluto, of transformation, and that's exactly what the 47 is about. It is about the karma. It is about going deep down into the alchemy of the body. And what Richard Rudd says about Pluto as well is that, like, we kind of circle around, or when it comes to our core or Pluto, like we circle around, and then finally we come that close into kind of the dark matter, into the body, into the place where transmutation happens. And I believe that the 47, even more than the 64, is about that. The 47 is inside that process of transmutation, transformation, transfiguration. We call it the alchemist in the 64 doors. So it's deeply alchemical, and the shadow frequency is oppression. So it comes from a place that's very uncomfortable, maybe even more uncomfortable than confusion somehow. But I've said it before, we are 2 weeks in a row, we have the sun and the earth, they're activating the same exact sun and earth. The sun and earth are acting exactly the same gene keys, the 64 and the 47. So there is something as well interesting in this part of the wheel, and in the deconditioning process. Richard speaks about the phase where we're in right now, and that's like some more gates, but it's about alignment. And in order to come into alignment, we first have to see what's out of alignment. So that would be the general kind of way in, I guess, for the 47.
I love that you brought up Pluto, because when we're talking about lunar alchemy, what we're really working with is our own place here on Earth and the confluence of energies that is occurring between the sun and the moon within our bodies, and how that is impacting our evolutionary path and our experience. And we look at Pluto, it is the furthest dwarf planet. I wanted to say planet, but science keeps reclassifying things. It's a planetary body, it's a cosmic body. It is the furthest cosmic body from our sun. And so in terms of its relationship inwardly, if we look at ourselves as a microcosm of our own solar system, our biosystem is a solar system. We're powered by the sun. We all have to eat. We all have to drink water. We all have to breathe air. None of those things would be possible on this planet without the presence of the solar body within this larger system. So when we're looking at Pluto inwardly, we're looking at the aspect of self that is so far away from our awareness, which is that shining solar light, that we're completely unaware of it. And yet it still is, I mean, if you look at the solar system, Pluto is kind of like holding the whole thing. It's circumventing the entire system. It's like the basis for everything that goes on within our systems. So when we're talking about Pluto, we're really talking about this absolute deepest depth that we can get into within our own bodies. And when I mentioned the lunar body, I'm really talking about our physical bodies and the presence of our awareness that is allowed based upon the functionality of our physical bodies. This whole idea of spiritual evolution is completely based on the possibility that through our attention, our awareness, our activities, we can inwardly transform the capability of our physical body to hold our total being. So when we're looking at our lunar body and thinking about, well, what is the possibility for transfiguration? Normally we think of transfiguration in the context of the story of Jesus and what happened after the crucifixion, when that being was arisen with full illumination. That's transfiguration. And that makes a lot more, in some ways it makes a lot more archetypal sense when we look at it symbolically. So when we look at our own capacity for transfiguration or even transmutation, the gift of this gene key, what we're looking at is the possibility of being able to harness more of our own inner essence as a source of light, a solar being to shine through our bodies. And so when we're looking at this transformation of the way the sun illuminates the moon and that which is separated from the earth, Pluto is an even deeper, almost denser form of this type of viewpoint because it's so far away. I mean, astronomers weren't even aware of its presence for a very, at least Western astronomers, weren't aware of its presence because it can't be seen with the naked eye. So, I mean, when we're talking about our own personal journeys, and we do all of the things that we can do to become a better person, to overcome our obstacles, to try to learn a new strategy to overcome things that are maybe causing us to experience negativity, we can still find that there's something driving us that we can't access, that we don't have awareness of. There's something that is making us deeply uncomfortable to move in this direction of evolution. And that's exactly what we're talking about here. And it's why this gene key is titled Oppression. It has the same title in the I Ching, although in my particular, the classic Wilhelm translation, it also in parentheses has exhaustion. But this depth of primal fear that exists even beyond our functional, what we understand as functional DNA, there's this aura coming from our inner bodies that we can't even look at with any form of science. There's no proteins coded by this DNA. There's no discernible, we don't have the awareness, scientifically speaking, of the function for where this is coming from within us. But it's such a deep primal urge. And it's almost, it requires a mystical degree of attention in order to come face to face with it. So, we're right in it. If there was a if there was a lunar alchemy session to be afraid of, this is the one.
Let's bring up the charts and maybe look a little bit at what's helping us today, what planets are helping. So I actually brought up the interactive chart. Let's see if it works. Yeah. Thanks. So here is where we have the sun in the 47, and then we can see that we don't only have the Earth, we also have Neptune here together with the Earth in 22. So kind of a strong opposition of those programming partners, looking at also Virgo, which is very detail oriented, very, very much Earth sign about organization of the everyday life. And then Pisces is completely boundless in a way, completely out there, completely poetic. So that's what we have today. We can feel either like kind of timeless and out there, or we can feel, because we still have Mars here, this kind of urge, this kind of energy to organize and to have better, like Ashley was speaking about detox today in the call. So there can be a way to have better habits and even a kind of detox. The other thing I feel is interesting is that we have Pluto making a trine to the sun. So there is some kind of direct harmonious communication between this 47 and the karma transmutation with Pluto that we were saying now have those similar themes. And it's also kind of speaking here to Neptune. So it feels like this, together with the fact that the moon is going to be together with Venus in Libra, probably now and between we finish lunar alchemy. This is about corruption. This is about seeing where is the data, where is there data corruption, where is there things that don't match. There is something here where there are some concepts that needs to die with Pluto, some things that are veiled, some things that are ready to kind of pop out of oppression into some kind of transformation. And the 32 now here, speaks about what do we need to preserve and what needs to die as well. In the 50s about coming into that harmony. So I believe that those are powerful themes. There's also an aspect I was seeing, so that's the south node together with Chiron. So I think there can also be some old wounding, and maybe for us on the call that are going to do the actual transmission, there might be some old patterns that have to do with like what your soul was used to do in all the lifetimes. The South Node is kind of where we come from and where we have felt comfortable in this lifetime. So that could stop us from coming into that personal authority and to really find the inner strength. So there's something that might have to do with forcing, something that might have to do with being in control. And if you try to force or be in control when it comes to this 47 of the karmic, transmutation, I believe that's not the way out of oppression. It's not the way out of corruption. It's more a yin energy, and that's what, when we speak about Virgo, it's a yin energy, and when we speak about Pluto, it's actually more a yin energy too, because you can't really force transmutation. It's more about yielding and allowing it to happen, an integration of the shadow instead of kind of going and battling it. So I feel it's powerful energy, like powerful aspects, powerful relationships between the different things that are interacting in the chart right now.
Yeah, I mean, as you're talking about all of the positions of what's going on between Pluto and the moon and this connection to the South Node and the role of karma in this particular transit, one of the things that we don't have often awareness of through our conscious thought processes is the energetics that are carried through the genetic expression of the physical body, and how that expression can be at odds with our identified self-expression. One of the things that this brings to mind is when a person goes through a series of experiences in their life and they begin to self-identify separately from the experiences that have occurred. I'll just bring up a particular example that most people would probably be unaware of, and I actually had to research this to understand what people are talking about on social media. There's a particular tattoo that a large number of people are getting, and it just looks like a symbol. It's got a vertical line with a greater than sign followed by an up arrow and then a down arrow. And it sort of looks like letters or runes or something strange. And it's a tattoo that's gotten by a number of people who have type 1 diabetes. And it stands for I am greater than my ups and downs, essentially. That could really apply to anybody. But essentially, one of the aspects of this condition is the blood sugar can raise to dangerous levels where you have to go to the hospital for multiple days to have your system kind of like reset, hooked up to tubes and all this stuff. It's very dangerous. You can go into a coma and die that way. The other side, the lows, is equally dangerous, where you just don't have any sugar in your system and your brain kind of runs out of fuel and that's it. And so when a person is attempting to separate themselves from the experience of their body, what's happening is oftentimes an attempt to crystallize the identified self outside of the conditions that are present. And this is often what we do as human beings along our evolutionary paths. We want to crystallize our personalities around our successes, our joys, our the things that we have enthusiasm around, our positive experiences with our families or our friends or our lovers or spouses. And when we attempt to separate ourselves from these experiences, what happens is we cut ourselves off from the possibility for the alchemy that is being triggered through the experiences that we may not really care for so much. And I'm not saying that in the context of, we had a when we were talking about, I believe it was Gene Key 59 and the shadow of dishonesty. I was talking about how honesty is not the antidote to dishonesty. To walk up to another person and just give them the most brutal, honest truth, it's not really the most effective way to assist that person on their path in most cases. I'm not saying that there's never a place for that, but similarly in this particular situation, if we just run headlong and try to charge at all of our unconscious suffering and pain, we might be able to break through, but in Richard Rudd's words, we're either going to experience some form of fracturing into delusion or some form of breaking of our egoic self in a way that is not actually going to help our path move forward. So I'm not suggesting that when we go to encounter the deepest unconscious shadows of our nature, that we, as Bella was mentioning, I'm not suggesting that there is any force involved in that process. Like she said, it's this very yin receptive experience that is not going to try to control the experience. So, one of the things that I was looking at today is this quote from that is in the Art of Contemplation that talks about its role in this process. And the touch of contemplation is the gentlest, most all-forgiving touch. When you feel any level of pain, this is the spirit in which you need to approach yourself. So this idea of transmutation is not going to occur with any degree of an idea of accomplishment or striving or forcing or controlling or this type of attitude that is like, I'm going to conquer the mountain by climbing up it, or I'm going to slay the dragon by going down into the depths, and I'm going to take my giant sword and I'll be like a mythic hero and just destroy all of the shadows that I find down there. That's not going to work out for us. So Bella, I'm thinking about where we've come so far in this process of lunar alchemy, and this previous new moon, we were looking at Gene Key 64, and you so eloquently described this process of lunar alchemy as this potential for a divine union. And I wonder what your thoughts are, or your response is, when we look at this possibility of divine union. I personally, and I assume most people who consider this possibility, we have this image in our minds of divine rapture, of ecstasy, of, whether you consider it from an external tantric practice with a divine loving partner through some form of sexual union, or you look at it from an internal perspective of this explosion of consciousness that occurs within you that is filled with light and joy. And, I mean, some of the yogis talk about this enlightenment as an experience that is dripping with ecstasy. When we consider the magnitude of what we carry within our non-coding DNA as a shadow of suffering from it within the human experience, like imagine the entire memory of humanity from really as far back as consciousness begins. There are some mythic traditions around the world that trace the pathway of the development of man through the evolution of the variety of life on Earth, from fish to amphibian to land and bird, all of those things. When we look at the depth of the memory of our biology that is unconscious, and the magnitude of the suffering that could potentially give us access to if we had access to it. I mean, not even to mention, just if you subscribe to the idea that human beings are moving through reincarnational cycles, the hundreds or thousands of previous lives that you may have experienced a variety of forms of suffering being accessible through your own body. How do we look at this idea of divine union when we're staring at this bottomless pit of suffering and what many religions have described as pure evil? That's one of the running conversations of this awakening consciousness right now is there such a thing as evil consciousness in existence? And when regardless of whether there is or not, or what our opinions are, when we're facing that, how do we experience divine union, or how do we approach that, or just how do those things play together? That was a really long question.
Oh God. Yeah. Well, I'm going to take you a little bit on a journey. Maybe not that long, but a little bit of a journey. When I hear you, what I'm thinking about, what I feel where we are, going back to basics, is that we are in the wheel, and everything is the wheel. Everything is spiral dynamics. And we started like as a consciousness that was maybe like an insect or reptile, where it's just about survival. And then we go through the spiral dynamics, and we include more and more, and consciousness expands. As long as this realm, like as long as Earth exists, that's what's going to happen, is what I feel. So this wheel it's a symbol of that as well. So what I feel when we look here in the Virgo gate, so now we're 64 last week, we're 47 now. this is an inner alchemy. So if we speak about Virgo as the priestess that can work deep into the body, deep into even sexuality, but it's more working with sexuality in a sense that you can come back to your own union. When we think about these gene keys, the 40, 64, the 47, the 6, which is the coding of alchemy, we don't think about it as sexual in a sense that we could think, for example, about Scorpio. And we mentioned that before. Here we have the glyph which has that little tail inward. And then in Scorpio, we have the tail that goes out. So here it's really an inner alchemy where we get to look deep into the body, deep into the dark. And often that is what we think about lower, like even the underworld. And when we speak about Pluto, that is also the underworld. So that's where it starts. It starts deep. It starts in the body. It starts even in those places of the unconscious, I guess, because that's, even if we would think about Freud and that kind of more psychological way of seeing things, that's where the shadow and what we can speak about fragmentation sits. And fragmentation takes me into the next part of the wheel, which is the coding of matter, which codes for the Venus sequence, where we have the intellectual, we have the emotional, we have the physical, we have the spiritual. And that's where we see there can be a pull and a fragmentation that often has to do with our parents, because that coding of matter in those gene keys is all about our 3 first 7-year cycles, also kind of psychological way of seeing it, developmental cycles, where there can be a fragmentation so that your emotion pulls one way, your thoughts and your spirit. So that's also in a way a sacred union. It has to do with the environment that you grew up in and with your parents and with other things that kind of pull on you. And then what I feel like when we have done those 2 steps, it's about the Scorpio. That's enough. That's unexpected. Like the same thing with Pluto, which is the ruler of Scorpio. It's unexpected. And here we have like the lightning in the 43. Here we have the spark in the 1. Here we have the daredevil that actually dares to risk even the unexpected. And then in the 14, we have pure energy that just comes up from the sacral and can be used in tantric transmutation and go up to the 2, being the way shower who we are, what is our direction, what's love, who are we, being expressed in truth. So it's like this whole journey through the body, through the fragmentation that happens through conditioning and relationships. And then this energy can start to be used in ourselves in a way that is coherent, where pure energy is circulated up to the heart and expressed in truth. So what I feel when it comes to sacred union, it doesn't start as even sexual, in that sense. Everything in this universe is sexual, like how flowers are pollinating and becoming more flowers is sexual, but it's not what we think maybe as sexual. Yoga is what we said last week, the opposite path of Tantra. And I would say Virgo, it's more about actually, well, for me, it's completely a mix of Tantra and yoga, everything, but it's a conscious way back into the body, back into the depth, a willingness to look at the oppression, to look at the confusion, to look at the conflict. So for me, it's even part of the ecstasy is to be able to embrace it all and surrender to the contrast that we have in this world. And then in your own little micro world, working with these things that are pulling you apart. And then for sure, there is a lightening, there is a spark, there's a possibility that a leap in consciousness is going to happen where you see something completely new. Maybe you see it as dying, maybe you see it as birthing. With Scorpio, you never know, but there is something there's something that starts, there's an energy that starts being available to you. And then you can use it in Scorpio, whether you want to use it like in the low energy chakras, like power and sex and all these things, or if you want to circulate it up through your heart and out as an expression in the world. And just to take it down to kind of to earth again, I believe somehow, and you could say, in one way, you could say it's a running away from some of these themes of like how the world is. And on the other hand, for me, the way that I have set up my life, the way that I choose in every moment is a way that allows me to do my personal transformational journey in a very deep sense. So with people that mirror that for me, like I'm not running away from that opportunity of what we spoke about in Virgo and Libra and even in Scorpio. But when it comes to the collective to the collective stress and pressure and shadow, I am very aware of setting my life up so I don't feel constantly bombarded and oppressed by the collective shadow that is expressing itself in so many ways in the world right now. And for me that is responsibility and not an escape. So I believe that when we do what we are here to do in the micro, in Virgo and Libra and Scorpio, and we have that beautiful sacred union in Libra between the tail in and the tail out, like the inner alchemy and the outer alchemy, or the alchemy with the other, then the virgin alchemy and the more sexual alchemy, that's where those scales can be weighed and where we can come into that union. And then I believe that this is the true law of attraction. Not in some way it has been popularized, but when we have that union with masculine, feminine, light and dark, all the polarities, when we can integrate them inside of us, that is the kind of beings that are going to be attracted into our field. And then we can build again. It's not that we are done, but the spiral, we can start a spiral that is wider and that probably has more love and more wisdom and a higher frequency. So it's never ending, but it gets more beautiful thread every time we overcome some of those challenges and some of the karma dissolves, and there is transmutation and transfiguration. So that's my answer to what you were speaking about before.
Yeah, I love that, because it really, really brings in this idea that transmutation never ends. And I think it's so easy to look at a process of, a lot of people talk about doing shadow work, and I think that grew out of this psychological, psychoanalytical work that was begun in the 20th century, and with the goal of experiencing oneself as an integrated human. And I say that on purpose, the goal, meaning we often can see these processes as having an end point, a place of arrival where the process itself will end. And I think from like a personal psychological standpoint, the idea of having an endpoint feels secure and safe, because it puts a boundary on that which is completely unknown. Because if something just goes on without ending, that means we're stepping into this abyss of unknowingness, of possibility for chaos. And I think that this level of awareness is really necessary to even begin to become open to this depth of unconscious material that exists within us. As long as we believe that we can uncover the truth about our inner selves, and that will finish the job for us. As long as we think that going through some process is going to end our processes, our need for evolution. Maybe, I think maybe the Gene Keys hints with a couple of the acidic frequencies that there is an end to evolution. But perhaps that's only because from our current perspective, it's completely impossible for us to imagine the evolution or the spiral that arises once we've reached that stage of our evolution. There's when you look at I can't remember, it's in the, I assume it's in the Transfiguration, but Richard Rudd describes the possibility for the event of planetary transfiguration, when the planet itself transforms into a ball of light and basically disappears out of the realm of the physical. It just, you know, is going to become something so other from our current dimension, that is just pure divine light, that it won't be visible in our universe anymore. I mean, this idea of supernovas really comes to mind when we start thinking about stars and their life cycle in the physical universe. What is going on behind the potential consciousness of that particular body? And does that pertain to a human experience in any way? And there's plenty of evidence that exists, even of, you know, of the experiences of sages and seekers and holy people who have been touched by the divine in some way, that it does actually relate to our human experience. Tibetan monks who attain the rainbow body, and when they go to transition, they simply kind of their bodies disappear, and they leave behind a pile of crystals and hair and nails, you know. It's like beyond our imagination or comprehension what is going on there. So, I mean, what I think when I'm bringing up that idea of divine union, and in your very, I mean, I loved how you're able to tie this response in with the planetary structures and what we experience cosmically as we go about our changing of seasons. You know, the changing of seasons is just like our physical life. We have seasons of childhood, adulthood, middle age, old age. We have these seasons that occur through us, and maybe they don't correlate to each other exactly. But this idea of putting a boundary on our evolution by saying, you know, once I uncover this particular shadow, or I transform this particular fear, that's it for me. I'm done. You know, you may be finished. There may be a point of evolution of consciousness where you're finished with the experience on planet Earth. maybe you'll reach a spiritual level of awareness where it's not necessary to continue that evolution here. But I think in order for us to move in that direction, we have to acknowledge that there is no boundary, and be willing to step into that great, deep unknown, that potential for absolute chaos, and the possibility that we may end up at some point on that journey staring into the face of something that we experience as evil, just because of where we're at on our own path. So I don't know where that gets us to, Bella.
I mean, I find myself similarly to when we were speaking about the 59 beyond sexuality. Like, I feel myself, I'm like, it's not so interesting for me to think about what's beyond here, in the sense, or what's beyond sex, because I know that we are here to be embodied when we are here, and we're here to be in an animal body, to live with a human heart, to have a creator mind, and to go all the way with that mind expanding, so that spirit and mind becomes higher, mind becomes one. So for me, it's not really interesting even about levitating from the chair. Like there is something where my journey has been so much to come back into the body and to trust this form and to live the ecstasy and the vibration of this form. So I can find myself being like kind of almost sighing, it's like, okay, that's, if we can really just be wholeheartedly human first, I know that the frequency of this earth is going to change so much. So we have heaven and earth. So where are you going? Like when somebody says, this is my last life, I came down to do this. I had a Akashic record when it was something, oh, you're a seventh dimensional soul and you came here because you hadn't accepted human suffering. Yes, in one way I can see that. I can accept that that's part of my soul journey this time, to come down and see that, and maybe become a little bit more seeing it from a sixth chakra perspective and not so much from a heart perspective. And at the same time, when people say that, like, does it matter that, like, do I want to know that this is your last life? Like, I don't actually care. If we're here to live, Virgo is every day, every moment. It's the now. It's not tomorrow. It's not when you levitate from this chair. It's not when you are enlightened, when you are so enlightened, so you have like dissipated. Like there is something where it's so important for me. Again, the 47 is the depth. It's inwards, it's inner alchemy, and it's something that happens in the form. It really does. So I would love us all to stay with the form. And that's what I said last time too. What I love with lunar alchemy is that it happens in the form, in the depth of the form. And it depends on our own ability to go to that depth. And sometimes when I get the frequency package of the transmission, it feels really light. And maybe it is because I'm not willing that time to go really deep, really into the core. And sometimes I come up here and I'm like, I don't even know where I have my hair, and like, the alchemy that's happened inside of me is like, I'm drinking water kind of thing. And that's the thing. I think it's about our willingness. And that's where I feel the more people we are that is actually doing this on the call and not only the conversation on Facebook, the more I also feel the collective, like the depth and the collective, being in a circle and doing this. And each one of us have the possibility to work with these frequencies in a different way in this form, because the DNA is unique. So when I light up my DNA with it, when I allow it to work, like you were saying in the beginning, that junk DNA can get turned on, and then somebody else that does the transmission with us, like there is something amazing here that could not happen if we were not embodied with DNA. So for me, that's the interesting part, and how we can create in energy like we do now, or if there is even more, like even in the sexual union, there are also very much karmic things that come together and that are transmuting and helping us to evolve and helping us to remember and helping us to heal and going to those wounded places where maybe there is no other way to go than through that extremely naked experience. So for me, that is what I'm excited about. And I can see how that part of me that's not that evolved yet, it's like, stop, just come back to the body, to earth, to this circle, to us that are doing it here. That is so valuable. And when we wake up to what it really is to be human and co-creating, that's when we are ascending together. And that's heaven on earth. And in that paradise that we know about, at least, they actually had bodies, and it was beautiful, it was green and all that. And that's kind of what I want to remember more than to be a spirit, because that's what I had, like from the beginning I said, that's what I had to work with my whole life. I was more friends with spirit than with soul, and soul was hurting so much, so I didn't want to come into the body. But now that sacred union is starting to happen with me, where I can appreciate spirit and soul, but I want them to meet in the body, in the heart, in the solar plexus, in the womb, in me. And that's the ecstasy for me. That's the beauty of being human.
I love that, as to really bring this whole discussion together as this concept of, or experience rather, this direct experience of being a body, or of inhabiting the body that we have. And I might extend that to say the bodies, as we look at the possibility for safety in our experience. Because what is it that really prevents us from engaging with a depth of experience that goes to the degrees that we're talking about? Is the fear that we will no longer be safe in that place, you know. And to me, talking about being in the body and looking at how are we collectively as societies and human beings interacting with each other, what's going on is this projection of all of those deep, 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 dark places out into the world and in one form or another. And our ability to witness that, be a part of it, and experience it, and and use that as a way to experience deeper degrees of our own beingness as we are here and now. So I think that's a perfect way to kind of conclude our conversation. For those who are joining on Facebook, thank you for joining us. If this concept of lunar alchemy, of transmuting the inner shadows, is something that is really sets you on fire, and you want to engage with us in this way on an energetic level, just make a comment under the video, and we'll get you set up so that you can join us. Because for our members, we're going to be doing quantum healing transmissions. This is a form of frequency entrainment that I don't want to say it accelerates necessarily, because I can't say for sure that it does for every human being. But what I do know is that the frequency entrainments adds a depth to the degree of contemplation that we're able to have, a connection to an experience within our bodies, our physical, emotional, and mental bodies, that allows us to come in, bring all of what's going on through this process of evolution into view. And particularly for those of you, that have gene key 47 in your profile right now, or whatever is inhabited in your gene keys profile, when we move through those particular transits with the sun and the reflection of the moon, those are incredibly powerful opportunities. So just make a comment below, and we'll get you set up with that. We'll continue on with those that are joining our solar membership with the transmission, and we'll see you next time. Thank you for joining us.